All those introverts out there, a warning. We're going to spend some time talking about promoting yourself, because if you won't do it, who will? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for curious writers, readers, and cooks. My name is Kate Leahy, and I'm here with Molly Stevens, Andrea Nguyen, and Kristin Donnelly. Today on the show, we look at the art and science of promoting a cookbook, how authors can launch their book effectively, and how the promotion game has changed, especially since 2020, because we all know what happened then. Hey, everyone.
Hey.
Hey, Kate.
Before we get really started, I just kind of wanted to throw out to the group, a horror story. Does anyone have one of those like cringy moments when you're promoting a book, something that, you go to the event, your books don't show up, you're doing a live demo, everything goes horribly wrong, or in the world of Zoom, you put the wrong time on your calendar and you're sitting there waiting for everyone to show up only to realize that everyone showed up an hour ago and you missed your window? Speaking from a friend's perspective, speaking for a friend, actually, no, that was me. It was horrible.
I could say all of the above have happened.
You survived.
Yeah.
You're stronger.
Yeah. Well, you also plan better too.
Oh, that's true.
You learn every time. Like when there are no books, you're like, oh, I didn't think to ask.
The no books thing. Yeah, you're like 80 books are on their way. They're just going to get here next week.
Yeah. Or when you're overseas and you do a demo and you just totally botch it. And you just learn to say, here's my Julia Child moment, everybody. We're going to start over.
Wait, what happened? I want more details.
Well, I was working on an induction burner for the first time publicly in Melbourne at an international food festival promoting the Asian Dumplings Cookbook. And I was going to make this wonderful magical dough that comes together with just boiled water. The water came to a boil before I got started. I turned down the heat. Yakety yak, got all charming with my co-host, poured in the water into the dry ingredients, and it turned to glue instead of seizing up and firming up into a dough.
Oh, man.
And I was horrified because I had practiced so many times at home, and here I am, the supposed authority. So I learned from there on, always have a backup and always admit your mistakes and do it over real quick.
Yeah.
People love to see the real things that happen to you too. That's real cooking.
I had a book event, my last book, and it was a local event. So it was a hometown. And I knew we'd have a good turnout, and I had a bookseller lined up thinking they would obviously bring a lot of books. And I think there were 80, 70 people, something. And I knew it was right before the holidays. That's where you sell a lot of books to your friends and family hometown. And I think the bookseller showed up with less than 10 books.
Wow. And I'm very optimistic.
And I just I don't know if they had done that kind of event. It was just, I never thought to communicate. I mean, I think we had a conversation about the exact number of books I thought I'd move or something, but it just, people were coming in the door. There was nothing to be done but roll with the event and be like, okay, we're still going to have a great time and we're all here. I'm so glad you're here. And book plates. We could talk about book plates later. It's a really good thing to have. But if you have those, if the books don't show up, like you said, they're late or there's a problem with them, you can sign book plates and leave those. So
nice.
Really good. That's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that. Thinking of like the book plate as the backup.
And a book plate really is just like a fancy word for a pretty nice sticker, right?
Yes, it's a nice sticker.
Yeah. I remember when somebody said, I need you to sign a bunch of, a few hundred book plates. And I was like, okay. And then what came in the mail was a bunch of stickers. I was like, I guess this is a book
Hello,
plate.
my name is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like the naive things you don't know before you publish a book. It's funny. For me, I think the most horrific thing is usually the anxiety. I mean, I've had events where not many people show up, but I've also talked to authors where they've done events where like nobody shows up, and they've said like, especially if they're seasoned authors, they're like, yeah, now you're a real author if nobody shows up to a book event. But for me, the horror is usually the anxiety beforehand. There was one event where nobody wanted to buy the book. They wanted to buy, I had made a curried carrot hummus, and everybody wanted to buy the hummus.
The hummus.
So,
Wow.
Anybody listening, Modern Potluck, there's a recipe for a curried carrot hummus. People love it. Take that recipe and build a business around it, because I do not want to.
It's funny you say an event where no one shows up, and I've had that happen. But what's almost worse is an event where one or two people show up. Because if no one shows up, it's a blow to your ego for sure. Because there you are and no one's come. And especially if it's not your first time around, you're like, okay. But it does humble you and all that. But if one or two people show up, you still have to do that event. And you have to do it with every bit of energy and heart, and do it for those two people, because you sell one book at a time. And that, in a way, I mean, if no one's there, you can cancel. But if they're two people, even if they just came in for the free taste of carrot curried hummus, you still got to do that event for them.
And it's humbling, because then you have those two people witnessing how small it is. But at the same time, then they get so much love and attention. So.
Absolutely. And you make a connection with them, and who knows what that leads to. But it takes a reset. It's a moment. It's like, okay, I'm doing this for them. And like I say, you sell books one at a time, and they get all the attention and love.
That is so
true.
And you have a stiff drink afterwards, you guys. So.
Or beforehand and after, depending on how the day's going. So events are something we can talk about today, but a lot of times those come later on. First off, I thought we should talk a little bit about when and how to get started. So say you're an author and you're in the process of writing your book, and, I'm trying to figure out, like, when is the exact moment where you have to push, okay, let's go on the publicity. I mean, does this happen when you're writing the proposal? I know we talked about book promotion when we were doing our proposal episode. Does this happen when you turn in your manuscript? Does it happen later on? So, I mean, for you all, when do you get started? Like, Andrea, for you, is this something that you think of before you even start writing the manuscript, or does it come later?
I think about it proposal time. There's a section, we discussed in the proposal conversation a little while ago about thinking how you were going to promote this book, this project, because, you got to convince the publisher to invest in it and to begin with. But also, my goodness, don't you want to share your work with the world? And how are you going to do that? So you want to start thinking about your target audience. You want to think about potential coverage from different media outlets or influencers, maybe some fun plans. And of course, as you're writing the book, gosh, think about perhaps there are collaborations with brands that you really enjoy using for your particular food. So there are all kinds of things, and, jot those things down somewhere so that you can return to them.
Really good point. Just thinking about, as you're writing, new ideas are going to come to your mind that weren't in your proposal. So just write them down. So when it does come time to get more serious about your plan, you can just go back to your notes rather than thinking, I had this great idea and I can't remember what my great idea was or what that great product was that could tie into my brand or my book. Molly, for you came out with a book not too long ago. How was that process like?
My last book came out in the fall of 2019. And
you've been working on it for years.
Yes, I have been working on it for years. And so, I think the promotion of the book for a first-time author to me was a real surprise. The first book I wrote, I wrapped up the book and I was like, excellent, I have a book. Now someone's going to sell it for me. And it was a big, very naive of me to think that my work was done, because as you said in the intro, Kate, you're just getting going. And also, if you don't do it, who will? And nobody can promote your work better than you, because nobody knows your work better than you. So that is something I think the sooner you realize that promotion is part of writing a book, the better off you'll be. So I was a cooking teacher before I was a writer. So I use teaching as a big part of my promotion. I teach classes and do book events that way. That's just one thing. We're going to talk about events later. But in terms of starting the promotion, I think, Andrea, I've seen you do this really beautifully, and I'm sure the others have as well, as you sort of tease out things in your social media before the book comes out. So if you do have a following, they know it's coming. But it's everything from, telling everybody shouting it from the rooftops, using any platform you have, saying yes to any interview, any podcast, anything, small or large, just to get the buzz going.
Yeah. I also think it can be really good to create a timeline for yourself, perhaps even when you're doing the proposal, where you're like, okay, a year out, I'm going to think about certain things, 6 months out, 3 months out, etc. And one thing to think about a year out, which, in Molly's case, you had the long book gestation period, but for some people, they have these quick turnarounds. I used to work for Food and Wine magazine, and those kinds of consumer magazines will sometimes plan their seasonal content a year in advance. Like if you need to do a photo shoot where you need the right season. So it's actually almost like even a little more than a year out. If you have your heart set on trying to get a story in a big magazine, you can start pitching that as early as a year in advance.
So the story would come out same time as your book.
Yeah. And this is only if like you live somewhere and there's snow and you want to do a story that involves snow and those kinds of situations.
Right. The long lead. And I love that idea, though, about creating your calendar. That's something that you can do on your Google Calendar or whatever you track your time. Just plug it in there when you're putting in your other deadlines for your manuscript. You want to have 10 recipes done by this month. You want to have maybe your 10 contacts for that you want to reach out to when it's time to start getting the word out about your book. If we're, say, creating our plan, what should be on the plan 6 months before the book is launched? What should be on that plan? Should you have your media outreach already kind of figured out? Should you have some events ideas? What is on the plan? Kristin, what about you? Because I know that you have worked as a co-author. Does it really differ for you, or do you kind of help your co-authors figure out the promotion plan?
So the publisher, a lot of times, they will do some things. I mean, the author does like so much, and you really need to be like kind of the main player. But you will meet a lot of times with the publisher 6 months or so in advance. And as a co-author, I will be involved in that process. And if I have connections that might be helpful, I'll often pitch on behalf of the author and publicists, like do that first intro instead. But I will say, as a co-author, it's one of the things I kind of like about co-authoring is that the publicity does not fall exclusively or
so true.
Far from exclusively. Like I do very little in the grand scheme of things. I'll say that.
I mean, so Andrea, before your book is launched, what kinds of things do you want to have in place that you yourself have like put in the blood, sweat, and tears to get created?
Well, I let people know that I have a book happening. And, look, you want people to be on the journey with you. So you do want to make that announcement. And yet, I've got to tell you, you don't want to lose sight of what it is that is your core work, which is making a book, and not spend too much time while you should be making the book, promoting your book that you've yet to finish making the book. So I really focus a lot of energy once the book goes to print. So that is pretty much 6 months out, right? So you got 6 months from the time that the book goes to print to launch. And that's when, you start talking to your PR person, your editor, to anybody that may help you figure out how to navigate things. When you're a first-time author, it is very strange because you may not have that network. If you do have that network of folks around you to help you, that's wonderful. If you have a social media platform, even better, because nowadays, and you need to realize this too, is that from the time that you get your book proposal in and accepting, you got the deal and all that, and you're writing and producing, the landscape for promotion will change. So don't plan a little bit too far advanced. Don't get, stuck. Don't get settled on things. Really kind of go with the flow. And promotion, and so many of us are introverts, is a weird thing because you got to talk about yourself.
Oh, yep.
Shamelessly.
Yeah, the way I get around that, and I so agree, is I just keep reminding myself, I'm talking about my work, my book. I wrote this book for a reason. I wrote this book to get it out and to share my recipes, my techniques, my learnings. And so when I feel like I'm talking about myself, I said, no, that's different. This is professional. It's your job. You're talking about the book. You're under contract to help sell this book. I just have to keep reminding myself that because it's very strange. And I'll tell you a story about one of the first times I was a teaching event to sell a book. I taught my heart out and oh my gosh, it was a great class. And 40, 50, whatever students were there and they were writing notes and doing everything. And class ended and they were all thank you and left and nobody bought a book.
Wow.
Oh no.
And I'm just like, you've got to be, I'm exhausted, right? I'm like, oh. So the next night, and it was one of these multi-city back before, we'll talk about after 2020 when we stopped doing all that. So the next night I went out there and they're listening to me, right? They're listening to what I'm saying. So I'm like up there teaching and I kept doing something that was very uncomfortable. And I kept referencing the book and saying, please buy the book. And I mean, hopefully not obnoxiously, but I made a point to talk about the book during the class and suggest they buy the book. And at the end of the class, they lined up and they bought the book.
Nice.
Oh, that is such a good story, because it's so true. If you forget, you could be doing this great thing, but you're not usually used to talking about yourself. People want to know that you have a book. They probably were taking this class and maybe they didn't even really know you had this brand new book out.
So it was very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable when you first start, but you got to do it.
Call to action. It's so funny because
Call to action, yeah.
Modern Potluck, my first cookbook, it came out in 2016. And I feel like since then I've studied so much more about marketing and then certain mindset things. And I kind of wish I knew what I know now, because same thing. I think I had an event or a cooking class, Molly, where only a few people bought the book, and I'm almost positive I probably barely mentioned it. And and now, like, I've switched my mindset in a lot of ways to think of sales as service, and you're not necessarily trying to like push something down people's throats that they don't want, but it's like they're already interested, right? So you just kind of gotta
Yeah, and if you're doing an event, whether it's online or in person, whoever that is hosting the event for you, whether it's a shop, or some kind of venue, make sure that they mention book sales so that you don't necessarily have to.
Yes, that's also a great way.
So that you're not in the position to shill for yourself, but that you have someone who is promoting you. Because why are you doing that event? You're doing it to sell books.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point too, and have that upfront conversation before the event to say, what will your role be during the speaking? Will you be asking me questions, and will you remind people to buy the book afterward? That's not something I should probably be saying. That's the nice thing. I mean, bookstores are in it for the same reason. They also want to sell books from your event. And if you kind of have that upfront conversation, there's no awkwardness about it. Yeah. So that's a really good tip, especially because we know online events are becoming much more important going forward. But real quick on just things that you can do yourself before we move on how to work with your publisher. One of the things that is really important, and this starts before you even have your first book deal, before you even maybe write your first recipe, is really starting to build that network, because I think that's something we've kind of talked a little bit about on if you already have a contact list of people that you want to tell them that you have a book coming out. That doesn't start 6 months out. That starts years before. And that's just your network of friends. Maybe you're meeting more cookbook focused people through social media. Maybe you have an email newsletter. I know a few of you have these great email newsletters that have outreach, but these are all things you can build well before you have a book deal or decide to self-publish a cookbook, I think. And that's something that, all of us have to keep working on, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that part's fun to me.
Oh, that's good.
I feel like networking, the idea of networking, it just always has this kind of like sleazy sound.
It sounds like synergy or, confab.
But building like real genuine relationships with people where you can like help each other out in different ways. Like, I love that. As an introvert who is shy and doesn't necessarily like getting up in front of a lot of people, but it's very comfortable for me to have like one-on-one conversations and think of ways to help each other out.
People helping people, right? Takes a village, all that fun stuff. So we've talked a little bit about things that, the author yourself, you can start doing, you can start working on. But then it comes to if you are being traditionally published, you will have a publisher. And the amount of attention a publisher can give you really depends on the publisher, the size of your book, the season of your book. There's a lot of variables, but there are some things you can ask your publisher to do, and there are other things you'll need to do yourself. So just starting off, I mean, Molly, I'll start with you. For you, what does a publisher do that is really crucial for the success of your launch?
I mean, it's a collaborative, we said before, you meet with the publicity team at the publisher 6 months ahead, when the book's gone to print, when we know when it's going to come out, and we sort of talk about the plan. I think the thing that they have been most helpful with is making sure the book gets into the right hands, sending it to media outlets, sending it, getting interviews on radio. I mean, can't guarantee they're going to get them, but they try to get it out there on a national level. My publisher is just amazing at sending books to whoever might land on the desk of a radio in somewhere, Wisconsin, and that person might call me up and say, hey, can I do an interview? This looks interesting or something. And so they've been very, very helpful in doing things like that. Supporting me. I mentioned before that I travel and teach cooking. I, haven't done that for a while, and I don't know how that will look in the end, but say it's even virtual Zoom teaching, they support those efforts as well by sort of, if I go to a town to do an event, they'll get in touch with local media in that town. And it's definitely a collaborative effort.
Yeah, kind of the big picture, trying to get the book into people's hands. They already have all these contacts that are already interested in cookbooks, who are their media outlets, or as you said, just different radio stations or whatnot. And they have the capability to just say, "Oh, you want a book? I'm going to send you the physical book." Of course, some of that might have changed a little bit with books going overboard, but it's a different conversation. But you're right that if they can't send the physical book in time, they can send the PDF, and then they can have that relationship with the contact.
I think that what authors need to remind themselves is that the publisher's PR team has a lot of titles to promote in each season. So you're part of a bigger list, and they only have so much energy, but you can have them facilitate your events. If you've got an idea, or let's say you want to go to a particular city, contact the publicist and pitch them some ideas and ask them, well, do you know a food writer in this town that I can hang out with? And really have them help you be a collaborator, so that it's not just them sending out books, but you're really working with them as a team member, but that you do, some of the lifting too. Sometimes I will talk to my publicist, whom I've worked with on several books. We have a list, and I'll say, you know what, I know so-and-so, and I'm just going to reach out to them because it's better for the writer, the food media person, to hear from the author than it is to hear from the publicist, because that means genuine direct contact. I'm not a diva, and maybe people who are more accustomed to having representation, they will want to have outreach from someone else, a representative. But I'm just I don't have time to wait. I need to know, are you interested or not? Again, what Molly said, you are your best publicist. And the publicity people at the publishing house are there to help you. Some people also hire someone outside of their publishers to represent them. You need to figure out how much that costs and if the cost is worth the expense.
Yeah, travel's expensive. And so, again, are people still traveling? But even doing virtual stuff, there's costs related to it. And with my last book, we had a budget. They shared the budget with me, and I knew what was available. And, we picked a few cities. I live in New England, so Boston was an easy drive, wouldn't cost much to get there. I have friends there. Are you willing to stay with friends when you go to a city, or do you need a hotel? And no judgment there. Some people aren't comfortable staying with friends, especially if they're working, they need their private space, but that's going to be part of the budget. If you're willing to, sleep in a friend's kid's bedroom or whatever it is you do, you save some money and you can maybe go to some more cities or spend an extra night in a city. So it's sort of figuring out where your comfort level is, how hard you want to work, how many days you want to, if travel is involved, or how many virtual events you want to do. And then as Andrea is saying, get creative. People have been doing a lot of interesting thing with at-home, events in people's homes, or smaller venues or restaurants. There's so many different ways to generate buzz around. But I would say, you need to figure out who your audience is, what cities, what areas of the country make sense, and then try to target those and then build from there.
It's true. It's kind of you need to know your target market before you go off and start to try to promote your book. Because if you're pitching, I don't know, let's just say a food and wine article for a publication that focuses on health and wellness, maybe that's not a great fit for them, even if it is a friend of yours at the publication. So kind of thinking about, your particular book, who's your audience? What are your top 3 messages that you want to get out? Is it an easy cooking book, something that's going to make your everyday just a little bit more, tasty? Or is it a book that's a deep dive into a culture? Maybe then you don't even look at the typical cookbook buyers. Maybe then could you do an event at a consulate? Can you do an event with an embassy? So those are types of things that you can think of, but know who your audience is and know what your themes are, what you're talking about, who might be interested in hearing them is pretty crucial. Kristin, for you, for Modern Potluck, what you did was really cool. You did events with people that you had included in the headnotes. How did you work with your publisher on your book launch?
Well, it's funny. So I did do a couple events as potlucks themselves, but
of course.
But actually, in the end, I had this vision to go travel the country, and everybody who did a recipe, do an event with them. And I actually never fully enacted that vision because it wasn't something the publisher was going to pay for. It was going to be all me paying for it. And my daughter was like 4 or 5 at the time. It was this big dream, and then reality hit. So I actually did a lot more stuff locally where I live and in New York City, which is not too far away.
Well, if the past 2 years have taught us anything, that, you do need to have a certain amount of agility in terms of, I did most of my events in 2019, and I had a whole second round scheduled for the spring of 2020. Well, they all got canceled. And so then it was, the global pivot where we were all, what do we do now? And so we, did a bunch of virtual things and did, and be ready to say, listen, I'm not going to travel the country and do potlucks, but what else can I do?
Honestly, if the technology were there or I had known about it, I think what I would do now is say to people like, if you want to have a potluck and have me as a guest speaker virtually, and I'll like come to your potluck.
I like it.
I would 100% do that. The technology is nice.
It's wonderful. I recently did a talk with a book club in New Delhi, India.
Wow.
And
oh yeah, so cool.
It was so incredibly wonderful to talk to people who are curious, who know cookbooks. They read them, they cook from them, and they gather to have a potluck. And they wanted to ask me all kinds of interesting questions about making the book, and not, soft questions either. And a number of them were well-traveled, who lived in the United States or Canada. You can do this now. I think that I don't see the pandemic as having limited our ability, but rather to expand our ability to connect with more people. Mm-hmm. Because, you can do virtual events now, and they're more comfortable for people, and they don't have to be super polished, and touch more people where they're comfortable. And they can be wearing pajamas.
And I can be wearing pajamas now.
Exactly.
Everybody wins.
Potluck, baby.
So actually that brings me to this really important topic about book promotion, is what's changed since 2020. I mean, we've already touched on it. I mean, I think online book clubs, cookbook clubs is definitely one of those things. I don't think I would have thought of that in 2016, 2017. Book club would be something you would do in person. It would be very hard to orchestrate from afar. But with online, and also some people now have book clubs that they have hashtags on Instagram, so you can follow. And so maybe everybody's not joining at the same time, but they're picking a book, and that month they're cooking dishes out of that book. And on Instagram, they have a hashtag that will have an entire camera roll filled with photos of dishes from a particular cookbook. And if that's yours, you can repost those and you can be part of that community. And those are things that I think aren't going away. But for just thinking about book promotion, Andrea, for you, for this book club, what other things has sort of 2020 sort of made clear that things are going to be a little different now in how you approach book promotion?
For Vietnamese Food Any Day, I created a separate Instagram account, and I used that account to just direct people to what the book is about. I also have a hashtag that I use for Vietnamese Food Any Day. And I just will use it every single time that I post something, whether I made it or someone else made it. I use the hashtag. When I find it necessary, I'll use the Instagram handle. I also use an acronym, VFAD, for the book. I don't want to spell it out all the time. My thumbs are tired. All right. So there are all kinds of ways that you can just have fun with social media. So Vietnamese Food Any Day came out in 2019. I still get, people who are cooking from it. And some people are like cooking every single recipe. Surprisingly, I thought I'd be the only one doing that in my own book. But I always want to comment on their posts, and I'll like put a bunch together and repost that and give them a shout out. It is so important to remind people that your book matters to them and to other people. No matter how tired you may feel about tooting that horn, man, your publicist has moved on to the next season's list, and all that's left is you. So you got to keep the ball going.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point about just, it's kind of all on you. You have that lead up to your book launch. You have your book launch, then you have a few months after your book launch, and then the publicists, they're busy people. If you're getting traditionally published, there are so many books and so few resources really when it comes down to individual authors. And they do a good job, but it's also, they need you to also do your part. And again, like we goes back to that, if you won't talk about your book, you can't really expect anybody else to talk about your book. But there are ways to do it where you're not just like, hey, buy my book. Hey, buy my book. Hey, remember my book? Like, hey, buy it now. And so one thing I think publishers now are doing since 2020 is you can ask them for a social media schedule leading up to launch and then after launch, and you can just kind of follow it. And you can, riff off it and do things that is going to appeal to the people who follow you. But that's something that I think is kind of new. And I thought that was really helpful. That's what I got for Wine Style. I asked, hey, you have all this data on what works for book launches and doing virtual book launches. Like, help me out, just give me guidelines. And so that's something that I think going forward, I'll just, keep those guidelines and keep editing them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that to just talk a little bit about the nitty gritty of things. So you want to think that, 6 months out, you're taking a look at your PDF galleys and stuff. You're doing your photo shoot, all that. You're looking for reviews. Maybe a month out, your publisher is probably going to send out advance copies to folks. About 3 weeks out, you want to remind your fans, and maybe like 2 weeks out, you want to maybe post some beautiful shots from the book to just give them a peek. You want to give people a peek so that they know what's going on. You want them to pre-order. You got to encourage that pre-order because you want to go out of the gate strong and you want to keep going. And 1 week out, keep reminding folks your book's going to drop. And then on pub day, that's like the book's birthday.
Right.
Totally.
They're coming out. Celebrate that.
Kate, you said something like, just get out there and say, buy my book. But it reminds me of what Kristin was saying about it's a service. The thing that a cookbook has is a cookbook has all these great recipes. Mm-hmm. And obviously you don't want to share all your recipes for free on social media, but you certainly can choose a handful, and that's part of the pre-work as well. And it's something I do with the publisher, but go through and identify, is it 6? Is it 9? How many of the recipes that we're just going to say, we're going to give these away. We're just going to share these pretty freely. But people love recipes. And so find some of your recipes that you really think speak to what the book is and share those freely. So you're not just saying, buy my book. You're like, here's this awesome recipe. And if you want more like this, buy my book, so, but just to keep
smash
in
that
mind.
Subscribe button.
Yeah.
I have a question, actually. Is there any kind of promotion you've done? It's like really moved the needle. Like all of a sudden you can identify exactly what an uptick of sales is due to. I don't have that experience with Modern Potluck, but I do with like some other stuff I've sold.
What I found is if you get a big hit where you're on Splendid Table or you're on KCRW, that definitely moves the needle, or you're on the NPR list for the best books of the year. The NPR listener, that's a good book buying crowd.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's so true.
The trouble with all of those is none of those are things we can control. Right.
Of course.
We would love all our books to be on all the lists, but, and we have to not get sad when they're not. But I think it's a great question. And I'm just trying to think of the things that we can control. What are the ones that have the greatest impact?
I do have an idea, and it's not, I don't have like the metrics, but one of the things, so Wine Style came out in 2021, and it's a small book. It's a small book for the season, and it came out in a quiet time of the year in the summer. So I knew one of the things I wanted to do was to partner with people in some sort of giveaway where we've got this wonderful cheese from Cowgirl Creamery. We've got some wonderful natural wine from booksellers, and then there's a book. What could we do to put all those together and then have the book mentioned in multiple email newsletters? So my reach, my little paltry following would go up past 100,000 people, because if you combined all the email newsletters, and then on top of that, you combine Penguin Random House's cookbook email newsletter. So we did this giveaway that helped everybody. So everybody participating in the giveaway got access to the audience, and my book was sent out into the world. And so that did require coordination, and it started with me. But what was really great is working with Random House's marketing. They really understood the value of that. They knew that, hey, we're not doing doing as many in-person events, we're going to leverage newsletters. They helped with imagery for the newsletter. They helped with the logistics, the sign-up sort of language, made sure everything was legal, and worked on the fulfillment side. So that was probably the biggest thing. But just to give a time frame, we started talking about that in May, and it didn't really come to fruition until August. So some of that does take a lot of planning. And it wasn't time consuming. It's just sort of email, wait, see. But those are the type of things that I think going forward really are effective.
Yeah. I did a lot of that for Modern Potluck, and the Chef's Garden also did that. A lot of like giveaways and working with people who have larger audiences. And I think it all helps. I was just wondering if there's like this see, even if you can't control it, like one thing where
Right.
you're like, oh my gosh, that, and I'm sure, I have no doubt NPR can help.
But it's a real momentum thing. It's doing a lot of little things, I think. And I know, Andrea, you have a very robust blog, and Kristin, you have your newsletter. But in terms of guest blogging, is that something that anybody's ever had any impact with or success with? I think it's an interesting idea.
I've done that once, but very, very long time ago. I haven't done it recently. I'll write something for another food website, for example. Mm-hmm. This is all, it brings up the idea of cross-promotion.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So cross-promotions are really great because you're not going to necessarily cross-promote with NPR or the New York Times.
100%.
All right. They don't really need you. But if there is a restaurant or a bookshop, or some other media outlets that's going to share the love, and you share the love with them too. That is where it's so wonderful. And I think that getting that kind of hit that Kristin, that you mentioned, oh my gosh, it's like the fantasy, right? You're going to out of the gate, get right to on the bestsellers list. That happens to certain books and authors who have an established reach that they really, really work. And you have to ask yourself, what is it that that particular kind of author has, and how do you get that? But you don't necessarily have to get that for book sales and to promote, because I like to think that you want to play the long game. Mm-hmm. The motivation for me always is get more people who don't know you yet to know you.
Mm-hmm. That should be the tagline of this episode.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to have it tattooed somewhere. Not telling. Undisclosed location.
Actually, I do have one quick opinion. Early in this episode, I talked about if you want to pitch a lifestyle story to a magazine. So that's a magazine where you're having all these photos taken of you, doing something. But in terms of book sales, I would predict that having something where the book cover is shown in a gift guide, like when people are shopping, whether it's a holiday gift guide, Mother's Day gift guide, something like that, would actually drive more sales than a lifestyle story. And I feel like the lifestyle story is more about raising your own profile as an author. So it's a long game versus short game.
I think one of my issues with the lifestyle story when it comes to a book that you're trying to get out there is that sometimes it feels very exclusive. Here's my wonderful life and I'm so wonderful. So as a consumer, I'm thinking, well, this person doesn't need my support. They're doing great. Why should I, buy in on this book? So that's the one thing sometimes, and this is, I don't think intentional, but sometimes features can make me feel like I'm on the outside looking in, and it's almost, it's like a celebrity feature. I'm not going to know that celebrity. And I don't know if I want to, and unless I'm really interested in that celebrity, do I care what kind of cheese they like with their popcorn or something?
Right.
That's really jaded. Funny. I sound really mean right now, but I do think there's some of that, I'm having this beautiful party and you're not there. But one thing actually I do want to talk about magazines is one of the things I heard since 2020 is just how the lead time is a lot shorter now. Sometimes it's 3 months, because it's just the world of print magazines has really rapidly changed. A lot of them have been bought up by one company and their push is really digital. So in that case, do you really need that year in advance pitch? Sometimes, yes, I still think that's happening, but I wonder if we do this in, the same episode next year, will we be saying the same thing?
Yeah.
I think that print will always be valuable because people love to see things bound and mailed to them, and at their newsstands. And some people don't know the difference or care whether it's digital or print. So if possible, do both. It's going to be easier digitally, of course, and you can write longer and produce more content. So, like what Molly said early on, do everything that you can and feel that you're comfortable doing, because this is your time to shine, man.
Yeah, Kristin and I have a little side conversation about what you're comfortable doing and kind of around promotion, right, Kristin? And it's an interesting conversation. I think it's one we could have a whole episode on, because you have to do a little bit of both. You have to feel comfortable and authentically genuine in representing yourself and your work, or your work and yourself, whichever you need to say to put it out there. But you also have to do things that are beyond your comfort level too. You have to go out there. I mean, maybe you don't. Maybe you're comfortable promoting, but if you're not, as you said at the start, that many authors tend to be introverted to begin with. So there is that stretch, and I could say for myself, doing an event, I think of it as putting on a uniform before I go out to, if there's a stage, if there's whatever it is, if it's sitting in a chair in a library, for a book club. But before I go on, and Deborah Madison, years and years ago, Cookbook author, said something to me, and she said, no matter what is going on, you go out of the room for a minute, close the door, find a bathroom, a closet, whatever you need, put on some lipstick, take a breath, and go back in, because that little moment is where you put on your game face, you put on your uniform, you're going to work. This is work. Mm-hmm. And you act like, people, you don't have to not be yourself. In fact, you should try to be yourself, but it just helps me to think of, I used to wear a chef's coat to do it, which is very old school, and I don't do that anymore. But
I kind of want to bring that back.
I know, but it helps me feel like now if it's appropriate, I'll wear an apron, because it just felt like it was a little bit of a, it boosted me up a little bit. It just boosted my confidence, my strength, my ability to be in a public place with something that's very personal, which is your work.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I love that.
That is such good advice. I love that idea of just putting on your uniform, your game face, and going. And that really can go whether this is a virtual event or it's an in-person event. It really doesn't matter either way.
Absolutely.
So that's wonderful advice.
There's great lipstick out there nowadays, you guys.
If only I didn't get it on my teeth, There's so many aspects of book promotion that we can go into, and we can get into the weeds. But I think that's pretty much a good overview of just a type of thing, just to get like your brain going on all the possibilities that are out there. It's not you standing at a podium at a bookstore talking about your wonderful book. It's really a lot more varied, and it's a lot more conversational than maybe in the past, but it's still a lot of work, and you get out of it what you put into it a lot of times.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, definitely.
I've learned some things, so I'm going to write down some notes for my future book launches. But just to wrap things up, in just a quick lightning round, I wanted to just ask you all, what's the biggest way that future book launches will be different from what we've seen in the past? Kristin, I'm going to throw this hot potato on your lap first.
This is not a cookbook example, but I've been watching Jenna Kutcher, who is an entrepreneur, and she is launching a book sometime this summer. She is really building a community around this launch. A lot of what she does is like taking you behind the scenes of everything she does. So often behind the scenes of her business. So this is taking you behind the scenes of her book. And so she's like had her agent on her podcast. She's had her editor on her podcast. She's created a whole separate like tag, I think, for her email list where people who want to hear about the book launch get that sort of insider info. And I find that really interesting. And I think there could be something to learn. Oh, totally separate. Yeah. Pre-orders and having a little gift for pre-orders. Melissa Clark did this awesome thing when her book about French food came out, and she provided a PDF to anybody who pre-ordered with her favorite places in Paris. And I thought that was awesome because I love Paris, and I was like, I want that. I'm going to order that book right now.
Oh, so smart. Such a good idea. Yeah, the free giveaway for pre-orders. We didn't talk about pre-orders, but yes, that's a great idea. Andrea.
Go virtual or go home, so to speak. Terrible cliche. But you want to be flexible and be willing to give people a peek behind the curtain. And I've used separate email lists in the past for people who were interested in Vietnamese food any day. I'll probably do it again with my upcoming book coming out in 2023. Just talk to people about what you're working on, because people want to know. They want to be part of your journey, but at the same time, you want to have energy left to focus on actually making the book as best as you can. So I'm always kind of like telling people, it's not just about the promotion. At the end of the day, you got to put out a good book, and all those reviews, whether it's at your local bookshop or on Instagram, they really do matter. And also talk to librarians. I love librarians. They're like one of my number one advocates.
Such a good idea. And libraries have events.
Yes.
Yeah, Andrea, you mentioned librarians, and I got to talk about bookshops. And this is the past, the present, and the future. Bookshops are not going away. Bookstores are not going away. I mean, yes, online shopping is a thing, but bookstores are still there. Brick and mortar, people will continue to buy books in their community. And so anywhere you go to the bookstores. Go to the bookstores. If they carry your book, which would be awesome, even if it's one copy, you sell books one at a time. Doesn't matter what the numbers are. They still get sold one at a time. And talk to them, introduce yourself. If there's a book there, offer to sign it, sign stock for two reasons. One, people love a signed book. Plus, once it's signed, they can't return it. Returns are a whole other conversation. But really get to know, because a consumer comes into a bookstore, they're looking for a different experience than buying online. They're going to stand in front of the cookbook section. And if someone comes over and says, "Can I help you?" Be like, "Oh, this amazing, really nice, interesting, however you get described, author came in the other day or 3 weeks ago, they'll remember you." So honor and support and make friends with your booksellers.
Molly, I'm going to kick you off this podcast because you took my answer.
I'm so sorry.
So I mean, that was the thing. Like, you sell books one at a time, and those bookstores are really valuable in word of mouth. And if they're a fan of yours, they can hand sell your book. And if they hand sell it to somebody who likes it, that person might buy 10 for the holidays to give to everyone in their family. So you have to think of it as a relationship building game, and it can take a while. And if it's your first book, this can feel really daunting, but it's about those relationships can also make it a lot more fun. So you can get excited about book promotion rather than dread it. And for all those introverts out there, you want friends in good places. That was so much fun. I learned some things. I'm going to take some notes after we get off, but I want to thank everyone for joining us for another episode of Everything Cookbooks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for listening to Everything Cookbooks. If you have questions or comments, ping us on Instagram at Everything Cookbooks, or send us a message at our wonderful new website, everythingcookbooks.com. Thank you to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. And if you have a few seconds to spare, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really does help more people find the show. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.